So as Hani said, I'll start off with the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, the Philadelphia 76ers, after, their interesting offseason, have been playing very well. They are currently the first seed in the Eastern Conference. Um, I'll talk about this with another team later on too. But the Philadelphia 76ers, I think they're an interesting team, right? So they added some veteran presence, right, with Danny Green and Dwight Howard. They picked up some more shooting, especially again with Danny Green, especially with Seth Curry. And then, they have a new coach in Doc Rivers, right? So when you take all of those into account, those are definitely upgrades over what they have, especially their coaching staff, right? When you're talking about, we've had our criticisms of Doc Rivers, right? We've definitely had our criticisms of Doc Rivers, but there's no denying that he's a substantial upgrade over Brett Brown, right? Yeah. There's no denying that. So when you add in all of those factors and add in all those pieces that they got this offseason, there's no doubt that they should be better this season. But there's still a number of questions that surround them, and a number of things that have happened to them this season that have helped them to get to that first spot in the Eastern Conference and made them look as impressive as they are. The first factor we have to talk about is Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid has been an absolute monster this season. He definitely looks better. He looks like he's taking that next step. We've mentioned it previously in some of our episodes past as well. He definitely looks like he's taken that next step in his development. Joel Embiid is a bona fide MVP contender as of right now, and he looks amazing. Another guy that stepped up very well for them, and which we should have, I think, well, we kind of saw it, but we should have probably seen it a bit more, is Tobias Harris. We know he's had his best career years under Doc Rivers. When you think about his LA Clippers year, where he was almost an all-star. So it's no surprise that he's having a great season once again with Doc Rivers, and he's taken that second option on offense for the team. With all of those points, you can say, oh, what's the questions about them? They just look like a better team. That's, it's pretty simple. It's not as simple as that, right? First of all, they start out with a relatively mild schedule, right? So if we're being honest, they haven't played the best of teams. As we know, the Eastern Conference is kind of seriously not as good as the Western Conference this year. And again, it is a very weird season, so everyone's just like all over the place. But the Eastern Conference, for a fact, has not been as good as the Western Conference when we're looking at them record-wise. So the Philadelphia 76ers have had a relatively mild schedule. That's number one. And then, so they've definitely improved their scoring and defensive outputs. However, if we want to be true to our opinion of what they are, we have to look at what they were last year, right? And if we're being real, their ratings are about the same last year. So in the 2019 to 2020 season last year, they had an offensive rating of 111.3, which was good for 13th out of 30, right? Around middle of the pack, while their defensive rating was 109, which was 8 out of 30. And that was in the top 10, and their net rating was a 2.4. So that was literally 10th in the league. Whereas this year, we see that they have a 112.6 offensive rating, which is an increase from last year, but comparing it to this year's teams, they're at the exact same spot. They're 13th in the league, right? So they technically haven't gotten any better, even though they are scoring more points. And then defensively, they have a 109.9 rating, right? Which is worse than last year, but it's actually better in terms of the ranking wise. They are one spot ahead of last year. They have the 7th ranked defense in the league, and they have a 2.7 net rating, which is 9th out of 30th. So they're still a very good team, but if you compare them to what they were last year, where there was a number of people who had criticisms of them last year, including us, they look about the same, if we're being real, with the exception of Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris, right? They still have the same turnover issues. They're ranked 28th in the league. It looks like maybe Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid might never figure out how to stop turning the ball over. It kind of looks like it at this point. Their bench is still hit or miss. They are 5th in scoring, but if we look at what they are as a team and we look at the games, their bench is a bit hit or miss, especially if you go down the line of their names off the bench. Guys like Dwight Howard, who was brought in there to bring more stability to that big man spot after Joel Embiid leaves the game. has kind of been hit or miss. He's kind of not being great for them. Seth Curry has cooled down significantly from the beginning of the season. All right. And again, I think a lot of the issues that surround them are the same as last year, where they have the same issue of which 76er squad is going to come to play each night. And we saw this with the Raptors, as Raptors fans, right? That first game, the Raptors played very well against them. Philly just did not seem like they wanted to be there. Whereas in the second game, they had a significantly better start. Now, the Raptors did weather that and played well against them in the second half. But we saw what Philly can be. It was a tale of two halves, right? And so it still seems to be the puzzling question with Philadelphia. And the most confusing thing, I think, if you're a Philly fan, is what do we actually make of this team? Like, which version is going to show up? And that's a recurring issue since last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I see you stand with the Sixers, and I've been very critical of the Philadelphia 76ers, and I think mostly it had to do with roster construction. And you mentioned before, like the ratings have kind of been very similar over the past 3 seasons. And that has a lot to do with the fact that your main two options, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, have been constants. And you know that they're great, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They're both great players in their own rights. But Embiid has looked a lot better this season. And that's been a major factor as to why, although, ranking wise, they don't look like a different team, but they're performing as a better team because of the fact that Embiid's, taking that step up and in turn elevating his team in the process. But I do want to touch upon, obviously the fact that you did mention, they do have some of these issues still. And one of them is which team will show up. To me, that's been a recurring theme with the Sixers. But I think now that the roster is constructed better, and now you have a coach who's utilizing these guys better, like utilizing Ben Simmons in a role that he's doing very well in this season for his standards. Tobias Harris is doing very well, and Embiid's doing very well. And I think overall, as a whole, that puts the Sixers in a better position to succeed. Now, it depends on will they put the effort to do so? That is yet to be seen. But I think a key element that I've seen with the Sixers this season is that they can play multiple different ways. They can play small, they can play big, they can stretch the floor, they can play inside, and I think that's something that I notice a lot with them. And I think, at least, for me anyways, I think that's the big reason why they're in the position that they are this season.
Yeah, like as you were saying, right? Though the stats don't exactly say that they're much of a different team, I think the eye test matters, right? Yeah. And we can both say this as Toronto Raptors fans because we do see Philly 4 times a year in the Atlantic, I guess 3 times this year, right, in the Atlantic Division. The eye test matters, and Philly looks significantly better. They look like they know how to weather the storms of the game, right? Whereas before, you saw if the opposing team went on a run, Philly would kind of deflate. And, they would roll over sometimes.
Yeah.
A lot of that has to do with the veteran presence that they added with guys like Danny Green, Dwight Howard, a capable shooter in Seth Curry, and the coaching presence that they have now, right? Whatever you want to say about Doc Rivers, he still has a championship under his belt. He knows how to get that far, right? So he has that requisite experience, whereas we can see, especially during the latter stages of his tenure, Brett Brown was probably hated by everyone in Philadelphia, including the organization, the players, the fans. Like, nobody liked him, right? Everyone had huge issues with him, which was what contributed to guys like Jimmy Butler and JJ Redick wanting to get out of there. So for that reason, again, we're not the biggest Sixers fans, especially since we're Raptors fans, but for those reasons, the veteran leadership and the coaching change, as well as the fact that nobody in the Eastern Conference can realistically stop Joel Embiid. There's nobody in the East who has a center that can match up well with Joel Embiid, especially given how well Joel Embiid is playing and how assertive he looks this year compared to where he might have drifted in and out of games last year. He looks like a dominant presence this year. Yeah. And so with Joel Embiid playing like he is, and the Sixers and their new pieces, my verdict for the Philadelphia 76ers is actually that I would put them as a legitimate contender coming out of the East.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there on putting them as a contender. And I think you touched upon it mentioning of Joel Embiid that not many of the other teams in the Eastern Conference can really stop Joel Embiid. You know, you look at a team like Brooklyn, they don't really have a big man that can keep up with Embiid. You know, they have DeAndre Jordan, but I would take Embiid over DeAndre Jordan any day.
DeAndre's washed. Let's be
Exactly.
real.
So there you go. So Brooklyn doesn't have one. Milwaukee, Brook Lopez or Joel Embiid. Once again, I'm taking sorry. I was about to say Brook Lopez. No, but I'm taking Joel Embiid in that matchup as well. Then Boston, Daniel Tice. I mean, Boston has gave Philly some fits, but I think Joel has kind of grown past that over the past couple of seasons. So when you kind of look at the contending teams in the Eastern Conference, Philly has, an advantage that a lot of the other teams just don't have. And a lot of people say the big man position is dead. Well, Philly clearly has the combat to that, and also they have a lot of wing talent. They'll have a lot of length that I think defensively puts them in a position where they could realistically be be a contending team that can compete.
I think one more thing I want to talk about that you mentioned, I think I kind of glossed over as well until you said it, is their adaptability this year, right? They can play multiple styles. They look comfortable playing different ways, however the game goes. Whereas before, if they didn't run their style, you could see if Ben Simmons bringing the ball up the court and then, having Joel Embiid in the post. If you didn't have him doing that, then they would significantly deflate. Whereas this year, as you're talking about, they can adapt on the flying games.
Yeah, but I mean, overall, man, the Sixers have been great this season. I think it's safe to say that they are actually true contenders this season. Now we'll see what happens in the playoffs, but Philly's been performing pretty well this season.